In a remote corner of the world, nestled between dense forests and misty mountains, lay the village of Eldergrove. It was a place forgotten by time, where the sun barely pierced through the thick canopy of trees, and shadows danced eerily in the twilight. The villagers lived simple lives, tending to their crops and livestock. But there was an unspoken rule. No one ventured out after dark. Legend had it that Eldergrove was cursed. Many years ago, a witch had been wronged by the villagers, and in her wrath, she cast a spell that plunged the village into eternal slumber at midnight. Every night at 12, the villagers would fall into a deep sleep, their bodies frozen in time. But it was not just sleep. It was a sleep filled with nightmares, where they could hear the witch's cries echoing through the night. One fateful evening, a curious traveler named Thomas stumbled upon Eldergrove. He had heard tales of its beauty and mystery, but was unaware of its dark past. As he entered the village, he noticed an unsettling stillness. The houses were quaint but worn down, and an eerie fog hung low over the ground. As dusk fell, Thomas decided to stay for the night. He found an inn run by an elderly woman named Agnes. She welcomed him with a warm smile, but warned him about the midnight curse. "You must stay awake," she urged. "If you fall asleep, you may never wake again." Intrigued yet skeptical, Thomas dismissed her warnings as mere folklore. He spent the evening chatting with Agnes and learning about the village's history. As midnight approached, he felt a strange sensation creeping over him, a heaviness that threatened to pull him into slumber. At exactly midnight, a chilling wind swept through Eldergrove. The air turned cold, and Thomas felt his eyelids growing heavy. He fought against it, determined to uncover the truth behind the village's curse. But as he looked out of his window, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The villagers were emerging from their homes, their eyes glazed over and their movements mechanical. They walked in unison towards the center of the village, as if drawn by an unseen force. Thomas's heart raced as he realized they were not just sleeping. They were being summoned. He rushed outside to follow them, adrenaline surging through his veins. As he reached the village square, he saw a figure cloaked in darkness standing before an ancient stone altar, an apparition of the witch herself. Her voice echoed through the night like a haunting melody. "Awake from your slumber," she cried, her voice both beautiful and terrifying. "Join me in eternal darkness." The villagers began to chant in unison, their voices rising in a crescendo that filled Thomas with dread. He could see their faces twisted in fear, yet unable to resist her call. Desperation surged within him as he fought against the overwhelming urge to sleep. In that moment of clarity, Thomas remembered Agnes's words. "Stay awake." He closed his eyes tightly and began to chant a counter-curse he had learned from old tomes during his travels, a spell meant to break enchantments. As he spoke the ancient words aloud, a bright light emanated from him, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The villagers halted mid-chant, confusion washing over their faces as they turned toward him. "Break free," Thomas shouted with all his might. "You are not hers." The light grew brighter until it enveloped everyone in its warmth. One by one, the villagers began to awaken from their trance-like state. The witch screamed in rage as her power waned against Thomas's spell. With one final cry of defiance, she vanished into thin air, leaving behind only echoes of her fury. The villagers blinked in disbelief as they regained their senses, realizing they had been freed from their curse. As dawn broke over Eldergrove, Thomas stood amidst the villagers, who now looked at him with gratitude and awe. They had been saved from an eternity of nightmares by one brave soul who dared to fight against darkness. From that day on, Eldergrove flourished once more under the light of day. The curse was lifted forevermore, and though whispers of the witch still lingered in tales, told around fires at night, they were no longer bound by fear. And every year on that fateful night, when darkness threatened to claim them again, they would gather together to celebrate their freedom. Their laughter ringing out like music against the backdrop of a once sleeping village now alive with hope and resilience. In the small, isolated town of Willow Creek, there stood an old schoolhouse that had long been abandoned. The townsfolk whispered tales of its haunted past, recounting the eerie events that had transpired within its crumbling walls. It was said that a teacher named Miss Eleanor Hawthorne had vanished mysteriously one stormy night, leaving behind nothing but her lesson plans and a chilling legacy. Years passed, and the schoolhouse remained untouched, a relic of a bygone era. But as the new school year approached, the local school board decided to renovate the old building and reopen it as a community center. The townspeople were excited but also apprehensive. They knew the stories all too well. Among the brave souls who volunteered to help with the renovation was a young teacher named Sarah. Eager to make a difference in her community, she dismissed the ghost stories as mere folklore. However, as she stepped into the dusty halls of the old school, an unsettling feeling washed over her. The air was thick with dust and memories, and shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of her vision. As Sarah began to clean and organize, she stumbled upon Miss Hawthorne's old desk. It was covered in cobwebs, but something about it drew her in. She opened a drawer and found a collection of lesson plans and personal notes, all meticulously written in elegant script. That night, Sarah took the papers home to study them. As she read through Miss Hawthorne's notes, she felt an inexplicable connection to the long-lost teacher. The lessons were filled with passion and creativity, but there was also an underlying sense of sadness that resonated deeply within her. As days turned into weeks, strange occurrences began to plague Sarah. She would hear whispers echoing through the halls when no one was around, and sometimes she would catch glimpses of a shadowy figure out of the corner of her eye. One evening, while staying late to finish preparations for the grand reopening, she felt a cold breeze sweep through the room despite all windows being closed. Determined to uncover the truth about Miss Hawthorne's fate, Sarah delved deeper into the history of the school. She learned that Miss Hawthorne had been beloved by her students but had faced fierce opposition from some parents who disapproved of her progressive teaching methods. The night she vanished was rumored to be during a violent storm when tensions in the town reached their peak. One stormy night, just like the one when Miss Hawthorne disappeared, Sarah found herself alone in the schoolhouse once more. As thunder rumbled outside and rain lashed against the windows, she felt an overwhelming urge to confront whatever presence lingered in the building. "Miss Hawthorne," Sarah called out into the darkness, "I know you're here. I want to help you." The air grew colder as silence enveloped her. Suddenly, papers began to flutter off desks as if caught in an invisible wind. A soft voice echoed through the room. "Help me find peace." Heart racing but resolute, Sarah followed the voice down a dimly lit hallway until she reached an old classroom at the end. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a room frozen in time. Desks arranged in neat rows and chalkboards filled with faded lessons. In front of her stood a translucent figure, the ghostly form of Miss Hawthorne. Her eyes were filled with sorrow as she looked at Sarah. "They took my life from me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm outside. "I couldn't protect my students. I need you to finish what I started." With newfound determination, Sarah asked how she could help. The spirit pointed toward an old trunk in the corner of the room. "My lesson plans, my dreams for my students, they must be shared." Sarah opened the trunk to find not only lesson plans but also personal letters from students expressing their love for learning and their gratitude for Miss Hawthorne's guidance. It was clear that she had inspired them deeply, despite facing adversity. "Share my story," Miss Hawthorne pleaded. "Let them know I cared." With tears in her eyes, Sarah promised to honor Miss Hawthorne's legacy by incorporating her lessons into her own teaching and sharing her story with future generations. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, Miss Hawthorne's spirit began to fade, a serene smile gracing her ethereal face. "Thank you," she whispered before disappearing completely. From that day forward, Sarah became known as one of Willow Creek's most beloved teachers. She infused her classroom with creativity and compassion, ensuring that every child felt valued and inspired, just as Miss Hawthorne had intended. And though many still spoke of ghosts haunting the old schoolhouse, they now told tales not of fear but of hope, a reminder that love for education could transcend even death itself